I guess the first question is, why did I do a design course, and what's it all about? So I've found more and more that bad design is really very easy to recognise. And there's an example of bad design. I think that came from a Google search.
What's wrong with that?
Bad design. It looks awful.
And pages that suck.
You just know, yeah. You just know when a page sucks, and it's also quite easy to recognise good design. That's got a bicycle, so I thought that would be meet most of Black Pepper's approval. But things just kind of look good. You see them and you think, yeah, that's nice and crisp. But actually, I didn't really know what makes up a good design. So easy to recognise bad and very easy to recognise good design. And it seems like it'd be a really easy task, given that it's easy to recognise good design and to design a nice looking web page. But I've tried before, and that's the kind of thing that I'd probably end up designing if somebody said design me a nice page with some stuff on it. So I found a design course online. It was called Try Design Lab. And yeah, it's an online course, it's nicely presented and stuff, so I worked through that. I expected the course to be very kind of wishy-washy and all about why choosing sky blue gives people feelings of happiness and stuff that I just wouldn't be very good at. But what I actually found was it's quite an interesting process. It's kind of distilled into very discrete areas, and there's kind of a process built around it to help you go from an initial concept to a decent design. And ultimately, it's about problem solving, which I was quite a big fan of. Being a programmer, so it kind of, some of it lends itself quite well to what I do day to day anyway. And the trick was knowing what problems need to be solved in order to create a fairly good design. Yeah, so that brings me nicely on to what did I actually learn. And the main thing that I took away was that good design is split into a number of discrete sections. Typography, colour theory, layout, and visual hierarchy. And the visual hierarchy element was probably the most useful thing that I did learn. And it's the definition is the perceived order in which a user sees or focuses elements on the page. But the way I sort of tend to think about it is kind of like the visual story of the page that the user will go through from start to end. So you have certain elements of the page that you want to be immediately recognisable to the user first. So a big block of text in the middle of the page and supporting information, you probably want them to see it, but with a lower priority than the main part of the page, and maybe some horrible adverts that you have to display because you want to make money from your site, and things like that. So there's a number of techniques that you can use to provide a visual hierarchy, and typography and colour theory and a couple of the other categories also kind of feed into creating this visual hierarchy. So the first concept of the visual hierarchy is the layout proximity. I've kind of taken the phrase "good artists steal" to the maximum here, so I didn't actually create all those nice images that you're about to see. I've just stolen straight from the course, so hopefully I won't get sued. So that you can see elements that are close to each other are perceived to be related to each other. And there's also similarities, so elements on the page that look like each other will be perceived to be grouped as well, which is displayed in that little image there. And there's also a concept of continuity. So we prefer continuous, unbroken contours and paths. So that image there, naturally we'd prefer to see 2 lines crossing rather than 4 lines meeting in the middle. And there's also a concept of uniform correctness, where elements that look similar on the page are perceived to be grouped together as well. And yeah, just a note to say, don't fear white space, which is kind of a natural inclination of somebody who's not used to design to spread out content evenly to fill the space. But this has an effect on the user's behaviour, almost more than the page content itself. So you can use the white space to guide the user's eyes in an intended direction and create contrast and just make an impression on the page that the user kind of takes away. So there's an example here of visually grouped related elements. So the card on the left appears cluttered. The elements aren't logically ordered, and if you actually want to pick out any information on the business card, then you have to scan it multiple times. Whereas the card on the right has been given a little bit of visual hierarchy, so the layout's more logical, so the address is grouped together underneath the name, which you would see first, and then contact details are on the bottom. So it's a lot easier to pick out the information and see what you want to see at a glance. And this is another example of how the visual hierarchy can be set up, just simply by grouping the elements. So if you glance at the list on the left, it has quite a clear visual hierarchy, although the actual content of the list bears no relation whatsoever. They're just kind of random vegetables and words and things. And the list on the right, there's no hierarchy there at all, but kind of you'd naturally associate the groupings on the left with the headings and the subheadings. But by far and away, probably the most powerful way of creating a visual hierarchy is using grids. So this is just an example of a nice looking site which is broken up into a nice grid. So you find that aligning elements in grids makes it very easy to create a nice look and feel and logical order to a page on a website, for instance. And it's really just as simple as starting with a background with a grid. And 12 is an ideal number to use for a grid. It's actually not a grid there, it's just 12 columns, but that's quite useful as a background if you're doing wireframing, just to align the different elements. And 12 is an ideal number for a background grid, because it's a multiple of 3 and 4, so you can span things across quite nicely and make lots of divisions. And this was actually embraced from the ground up in things like Twitter Bootstrap. So the whole layout is based on 12 columns in a grid, and there's lots of functionality for spanning across different columns, having offsets and things like that, and it's all designed in a very responsive way, which is very cool. So it's just an example of a grid being used with a background, and you can line up the different parts of the page, spanning across different grids. And this is actually also reflected in the CSS box model as well, with the different margins and paddings that you can add. And a very cool thing as well is the grid system is actually included in a lot of mock-up tools. So things like balsamiq, I think you can select to have a grid as the background when you're wireframing. So from the very ground up, you can sort of design towards a grid. So I've put a big link on that page because I can demonstrate this using an online mock-up tool called mockups.com, which is very similar to Balsamic for wireframing, except you do it online. So there you go. I should be able to go there. So it's just loaded by default. The one time I've actually used this, and I used this on the companion project to redesign one of the page design, which is an exhibitor landing page, to make it a little bit more tempting for them to upgrade to a gold package and get lots of nice features. So if I was to create a new project, upgrade. Just open up one I prepared earlier. Apparently it's saving. Great.
It's a little plain.
Hmm?
It's a little plain.
It is, isn't it? So I'm waiting for it to load up properly so I could demonstrate actually setting the background to some nice columns. But it doesn't seem to be loading properly. Probably not install updates. Great, yeah, so under the project title we can set it to a grid, and the whole sort of 12-column grid is defined on this 960 GS website, which has a whole load of information about why grids are good and things like that, and some CS template downloads and templates for Photoshop and all the mocking frameworks, but you can just select it as the background. And of course, because the projector doesn't represent greys and whites very well, you can't see a grid there at all. So imagine there's 12 nicely separated columns. But mocking out and wireframing is very useful at the design stage anyway, because it allows you to create a very basic visual hierarchy. You can squint at your design and you can recognise the parts of the page that are popping out first, and give it a very good overview. So if I switch back to that project that I had created, which was a companion project for signing up, this mock-ups tool is also very useful for sharing designs as well, so you can actually share it and preview it straight on the internet. So yeah, just sort of, it gives an impression of the basic layout and the visual hierarchy. One thing I didn't do on this, and my supervisor on the course picked up on it, was that I've only really used a couple of colours. So if I had used more shades of grey, then I'd be able to represent a hierarchy a little bit better by having the more important elements in a darker colour rather than a lighter colour, allowing them to pop out and give it a bit more hierarchy. But it's pretty cool. So you can come up with your wireframes and then share it between people for review and things like that, and actually use that on the companion project. And so come up with this design and then share it for feedback. So to exit full screen, actually get I'm very slick at doing presentations. Don't get math, they're really hard. icon Mac. So that's really sort of the main way of establishing visual hierarchy with laying elements out. So I'm going to go on to the next little section, which is colour theory. So this is where it gets a little bit ethereal, and as I was alluding to earlier, where you say stuff like use blue because it gives people a feeling of trust, and it's a cool colour, so they get relaxed. And I'm not sure how much you kind of read into it, but it's useful to have that as a kind of guide for when you're deciding on a colour scheme for your design. So if you wanted to have an energetic feeling, then you can use kind of a brighter, more primary sort of red colour. So I'm just going to go through a few bits of information about colours. So you've got the warm colours, which are reds, oranges and yellows, and you would use warm colours in your design to reflect passion, happiness, enthusiasm and energy. And then you've got cool colours, including green, blue, purple. They're often more subdued than the warmer colours. The colours of the night, water and nature, and they usually have a calming and relaxing and somewhat reserved effect on the users, much like myself. And then the other bunch is neutral colours. And they often serve as backdrops in design. They're commonly combined with brighter accent colours, again just providing a bit of visual hierarchy. And that is just a big list of colours and what they mean. So again, red with passion, love and anger, orange, energy, happiness and vitality, and I think Strava's probably a good example of that website, because it is all about energy and expending energy and recording it and sharing it with friends and stuff. And I thought blue was quite an interesting one, because it gives feelings of calm and responsibility and sadness. So an example of that would be the NHS website. I'm not sure about the sadness, but I guess they would want people to feel calm.
So the Black Pepper logo using black and blue is evoking evil sadness.
Yeah.
It's a mystery responsibility.
Calm, elegant.
Reflection of one of our projects.
So that's colours. So what does that mean for choosing a colour scheme for a design? Well, apparently, from what I read, 5 is a good number of colours to choose, because it's quite a workable number and you can combine them quite easily. Having too many colours on a page, I think, would probably be detrimental to the overall sort of viewing of the design, and a little bit difficult to look at. So in order to choose a colour scheme for a website, there was whole pages in the design course about the colour wheel and how colours on the opposite sides of the colour wheel relate to each other. And you can go through those, and you can sort of carefully put together a colour scheme based on photos, and choose sort of very finely different shades of colours and stuff. But I did come across a tool called Cooler. I think that are smartphone apps for this as well, but it basically lets you pick a primary colour and then it will give you a range of about 5 or 6 different colours that go with it very well. And one of the cool things it does is it lets you select a photo, and you can pick a nice colour that you like on that photo, and it'll give you about 5 nice colours for the colour scheme for it. So if I can get myself that presentation mode, then I will be able to show a little example of it. So that's it really. You can select a photo. Here's one I prepared earlier front yesterday, so if you want to have an energetic feel for your website, then I guess you would just pick a nice energetic colour. In colourful mode, that doesn't actually look very energetic because it's quite a light pink, but it gives you just a a nice range of colours that you could put into your design and use for accenting colours and bits you want to be able to pop out, and more neutral colours as well. Which is actually what I used for the project I had to do for this, because I didn't want to sit down and think about the colours and what they mean for absolutely ages. So that's really all I wanted to say about colour. I didn't take away too much more than that. There's lots of information available about picking colours from colour wheels and stuff. I just keep it all in my head, especially when I saw that Adobe Cooler tool and it looked really easy. So I just did that. And it's kind of the same with typography. It's a very, very old subject, and they provide a lot of information about how it kind of goes back to very, very ancient times when people first started writing, up to the printing press and how that all worked, and how choosing different typefaces have different effects. So I've just kind of picked out the information that was useful to me, and in fact even on the course they said, if you want any more information, go and read about it, because it seems to be endless. So leading is a thing that you can do in typography, which is, I just need to get my speaker notes back on. So this will take about 10 hours.
Last time you needed to take it so it's not full screen.
Yeah, I thought I pressed the crazy blue icon to get out of the screen.
Crazy blue icon is still over long. Right.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yes! Thanks, mate.
So music,
They're
Just
very,
work.
they're very expensive, so that's how you know they're good. Back on full screen. Yeah, so as I was saying about 10 hours ago, leading is the amount of space between lines of text. And I think the term actually comes from the printing press, where they would actually put little lines of lead on the templates between the letters. And decreasing leading obviously means lines get closer to each other, making a block of text appear more compacted. And this has an effect on the reader, so it increases the pace of the reader and invokes feelings of cramped conditions and claustrophobia, which can be desired in some circumstances, but I guess it really depends on your brief. And of course, doing the opposite, increasing, will reduce the pace of the reader reading the text. Yeah, so some tips on leading. If there's more words in a line, there'll be more leading required to maintain a pleasurable reading experience. And if word spacing is increased, then you need to increase the leading to improve the readability of a piece of text. And there's also tracking, which is the space between groups of characters. This is called the letter spacing property in CSS. And generally, the longer a line of text, the looser or wider the tracking needs to be. And the other main piece of information I kind of took away is the difference between serif and sans serif fonts. So a serif is a typeface with the kind of feet-like strokes at the end of certain letters, so you can see it there on the Times New Roman font. The F has kind of a wider end than the rest of the letter. and they're best for setting on large blocks of body text because they're easier to read than the sans serif font. Apparently there's no scientific proof of this, but most people seem to agree with that. And they help guide the eye along the text. For sans serif fonts, like the ones below, there's less contrast and variation in the stroke width, and that's typically used in headlines and signage because they kind of pop out more than serif fonts, and they appear blacker than the serif typefaces. So that's all well and good. So kind of know how to choose a colour scheme, and we know a little bit about choosing a typeface, and we know we need to look into those things and make decisions before we come up with a design. But what do we actually do with them? Well, there is a repository. It's kind of a repository. It's basically a file called a style tile template, which I have an example put up there, which is just basically a standard format file where you can put samples of the fonts that you want to use and also your colour scheme with perhaps some images as well. So that's the example I actually came up with for my design project. It shows the project was to make a fictional design for a fictional website, so I thought I'd use my Black Pepper Labs project of event photo and get some free design consultancy on it. So I pretty much copied the orange from Strava because I knew by then that that's an energetic colour and event photo was going to be fairly energetic. So I filled all that in. I didn't really know whether it would be useful or not, but I did find it quite useful because from going from the style template, I kind of had all those kind of style decisions in place already, so I didn't need to think about it at all when I went from a wireframe back to a proper template or an example web page that you can then build from new wireframes. You just literally look at the template and then put it in into the mock-up, and it's very easy and it all kind of works, so that was cool. So putting it all together, and what I've really sort of taken away from the course is this thought process. So if somebody asks me to come up with a design, then I'll start by creating a mock-up. So just a nice sort of wireframe example, and that's the one I did for that kind of event photo style project. Just aligning everything nicely to columns and choosing little sections where you can put different things. And then obviously filling the style tile, which we just saw about 3 seconds ago, and then putting it all together in a more fuller sort of mock-up. So you could use a program like Photoshop, or I think there's some nice vector graphic drawing programs like Pixelmator. But probably the most useful technique would be to actually make a small mock website, which is useful because clients could then resize the page and they could click around a little bit with certain constraints, and they could see how it handles responsively as well. So they could shrink the browser down, and they could see how different elements disappear and change their size based on the size of the design. But actually going to the mock-up, once you've got the style tile and a nice wireframe, it's actually very easy. And I think that is the end of my brown bag, so thank you very much for sitting and listening to it. It was very slapdash, and I put the slides together yesterday, so thanks. Any questions?
How did the course that you did work? So what were the kind of mechanics of learning?
So they had a variety of things. So you get a course mentor as part of it, and you have a Skype date with this course mentor every week, and it's broken down into units, and each unit will be a mixture of stuff that you've got to read, and it's all kind of nicely presented, and you can kind of read through it, and projects as well. So the projects tended to be things like design a mock-up or design something, and they had an in-browser editor which was kind of good for the first few projects, kind of like an in-browser vector graphics editor. But actually, for the more complex and more demanding projects, then you tend to. I found it easier to use a more complex program like Pixelmator, and then it allows you to export, and then you can upload the work that you just completed, and then your mentor has a look at it, and then you have a little Skype date, and they tell you what you did wrong. So the unit will be a mixture of those kind of projects and stuff to read.
And how long do you get to do the unit?
It's a week, and it took about 3 weeks to do the course. So I split my training time by using a day a week, just kind of racing through the reading, and not taking long enough to do the actual project, and then overrunning things like that. But yeah, that's pretty much how it works.
So did you need to be technical to do the course, or was it you just using tools online that anybody could pick up and use?
Yeah, I don't think you need to be particularly technical. Yeah, there's plenty of reading that's good. I think it would help if you played around in things like Photoshop or image editors and things like that. But the vector graphics programs is mainly just centred around choosing shapes and putting images on and manipulating them. And the course tutors are quite good as well, so they can give you a lot of information and suggest tools that you can use as well.